I love it because how many athletes get done with their game, and like you said, it's like you have to hang up the cleats. It's sad.
Absolutely.
You go through this depression. What do you do next? You find yourself as a teacher and a coach. That's probably the natural progression.
That was
right?
the logical way.
And then what happens to change that?
Yeah, so I was a teacher and coach for almost 10 years. And one night my dad passed away. He went from completely healthy to gone in about an hour, really. I mean, no medications, nothing. So, we lost him. And, man, I tell you what, I woke up the next morning and nothing was the same. Everything felt different, tasted different, looked differently. I thought differently immediately. Really went through a year, maybe even more, of just searching and trying to figure out what I was doing, why I was doing it, what he did, and why he did it. And eventually this kind of just emerged, this whole Mayner leadership and sports and mental game coaching. And really it was me living out my dad's legacy of what he built in me. And really I learned, not an easy path, but eventually I learned that kind of when he passed away, it kind of awoke in me this whole new being. Sometimes I even feel guilty of saying, my dad had to pass away for me to really find out who I really was. But I've kind of overcame that guilt now and that fear. But that's kind of what happened that made me, jump from teaching and coaching and find those bigger blips in life and live at that higher level. But he was very impactful in my life, and I built my business around the legacy that he built in me.
Isn't it amazing though? It's like when your back's against the wall, when you have the biggest, the things that just change your life, you almost feel like you can't go on.
Yeah.
That's a lot of times when greatness happens. Two things can happen.
Yeah.
It depends on who you are, what your mental toughness is like, and I think
Yes.
that really ties into what you do.
Absolutely.
Because there's so many paths you can go down.
Mm-hmm.
You can start drinking heavily. You can,
There's some dark ones.
pull away from your family.
Mm-hmm.
You can, there's so many different things that could happen, and you could just be miserable, or you could really start to find yourself and make your dad's death didn't mean nothing. Like
Right.
it awoke you, and all of a sudden a new you is born.
Yeah, and that was really my biggest fear, is that why did he die? And it was, it was a year of, it wasn't a dark path, it was just lost, It was lost in searching. We were very worried about the family splitting up, and we got even closer. And that's really how this all emerged for me, was the fear of not knowing why he died. And when I found out why, like when I learned why for me, like that was so awakening. That was such a we had to talk about the difference between ambition and drive a lot. That's where it started with ambition of I started to to see it, to feel it, of why, what happened and why, and then it moved to drive, and then it was like, okay, let's go, and then even the point of, okay, let's go, but don't know where to go or how to start, which is why I entered you into my life. Absolutely. But I'm
very, very glad for that. Yeah.
But it really comes down to that back to that sports mentality, that mindset, that mental game. When you get knocked down, that proverbial knockdown, what are you going to do, right? And what you do next is what defines you.
Yeah.
Not that knockdown, right? If it's Rocky said it best. It's not about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
Yep.
So what I thought really was to be dead honest with everyone, was my greatest fear in life, losing my dad. Right? The mentor that he was to me is, I can't even use words to explain it. I have now used that greatest fear that did happen to me and turned it into my greatest strength.
Yeah.
I think about my dad before I go into a sales meeting.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. And I just think it's really, really powerful. And that's some of the things that I try to get across to my clients, to my athletes. Because there's one of those moments in every athlete's life.
Yep.
Hopefully it's not their dad passing away. But there's one of those moments, and we try to use that and create strength out of it.
I've had the opportunity to hear your keynote speech, and
so yes,
what we're talking about reminds me of Dad's voice, and reminds me of the specific discovery you had, the story you had when you went on your run and you came back.
Yeah. So you want me to tell that
Yeah,
story?
oh yeah.
So as an athlete, I'm sure anybody that plays sports, or maybe they're a little bit weird in the head like me, throughout my journey of sports, I've learned to break down my mind and get really clear that I break down my body. So, one day, probably a year or so after Dad passed, I just needed to clear out, right? I needed to just flush the system. And so I went for a very long run, probably the longest I'd ever went up to that point, and broke my body down to nothing, to where I entered my driveway and could barely walk, basically. And I kind of not passed out, but just kind of exhausted myself on the ground next to this tree, and my dad's memorial bench is right there. And it kind of had just hit me all in that moment. It was just wow. And it was like he was just talking to me. He was like, "This is what you're meant to do. What did I do with you? I helped you achieve things that you could have never done on your own." And it was just it was all so clear, so fast. It was just insane. And it was that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help athletes achieve what they never could on their own.
That's amazing.
And it was so eye-opening. It was I was crying, but I was laughing. It was one of those moments when I hit 7 emotions all in 3 minutes,
Yeah.
But it was I stood up and I walked inside, and it was Courtney, I know what I'm going to do. And she was like, "What?" I'm like, "Yep. Just had a good conversation with I don't know who, but but yeah." And then I love telling that story now. It's hard for some people to hear,
yeah,
but and sometimes I get, depending on the moment of how deep I go back into that moment when I tell it, it can get pretty emotional. But it's so paramount in why I'm doing what I'm doing that it has to be told.
One of the first times I sat down with you, and then tying into that story,
Yeah.
and just one of the first moments, or one of the first things you said is, when I'm coaching, that's when I feel closest to my dad.
Yeah.
And then later on down the road, you told me that story, and it was that accumulation of understanding that your dad lived through you in those moments, and that's powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that like you said, when I get off that phone or that Zoom or that face to face, or and I get it back in the car, and I just kind of smile, because I'm sometimes I'm not even exactly sure what just happened or what I just said, or it's there was it was something bigger than me that just happened to channel through me, and I've been blessed to feel that over and over and over again. And I definitely think that there's a higher calling there. There's Dad's helping me, and the good Lord's definitely helping in this whole situation too. But it's powerful, and it's a great feeling.